one of the problems we have in the John Birch Society is that we do tell the truth, and people don't like it. And speaking of trade, we're finding out now that the United States and Egypt are nearing a pact to slash Egypt's debt. And oh yes, by the way, the State Department and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will take executives from nearly 50 American companies like Caterpillar and Xerox into Egypt to invest in Egypt. So there goes more jobs sucked out of the United States into another country to be imported back into the United States. You know the story with China. That's what happened there. We're going to discuss the free trade deal that they're trying to arrange between the European Union and the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, it's going to take 2 years of negotiating to get this free trade deal complete. Now, free trade to me is where you take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and on there you write that we, the undersigned governments, will not interfere with the businessmen in our respective countries to do business with the businessmen in another country. Period. That's it. We turn a blind eye. In fact, it's none of our business what you do in the way of business. That's free trade. The free trade that they've got at the top of all of these agreements is really a lie. It is not free trade. It sets up whole new commissions and even a court system. How many of you know, for instance, that there is a NAFTA court from which there is no appeal? And it is an appointed position, one from the United States, one from Canada, and one from Mexico. And they decide any disputes that arise due to this free trade. It's not free trade, particularly when you see in every one of these arrangements that they say very up front, very soon to the top of the page, that this is an agreement under the United Nations Charter. That it conforms to the United Nations Charter. What's that got to do with me doing business with a man across the border? Nothing. These are international entanglements. That's what these things are. They're not free trade at all. They are what George Washington warned us against, even Jefferson, saying we shouldn't be entangled in these sorts of things. The thing is that they refer to this as the Atlantic community. They're bringing the Atlantic community closer together and that sort of thing. Whenever they start using that word community, you better let the bells and whistles go off in your head, because they're talking about something entirely different than free trade. For instance, the Atlantic community is being promoted, the idea, just like the North American community, by organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations. The Atlantic Council is another one. You should go to these and Google these things and look at what these websites have to say about their goals. They want to have closer ties. They want to have a vision for an Atlantic community and all the rest of it. And what they really mean in the long run is they're going to cut back on the sovereignty of the United States, the independence of the American people, and in its place substitute something else, the Atlantic community. And until they ultimately have what they call the New World Order. Now, if you go to the Atlantic Council website, you'll find that Chuck Hagel, the man who is up for Secretary of Defense, is the chairman. Now, here's a man who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, is the chairman of the Atlantic Council, trying to bring the North Atlantic area completely into one country. There's no other conclusion that you can come to if you look and study at what they're trying to do. Is going to be made the Secretary of Defense. Who's he going to defend us against? Is he going to defend us against internationalism? Is his love going to be the United States or this international community? So you've got a lot of neocons that don't want Hegel, but there's a lot of other reasons why you don't want Hegel, and that's because he's tied at the hip with all these internationalists. He puts that first over his commitment to the oath that he took as a United States Senator to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think he's one of the domestic enemies of the Constitution if he is willing to give up any sovereignty to an international body, at any rate. It's something that is not free trade. If you look at it, they build new judicial systems from which there is no appeal. They are subordinate to the United Nations. They say so in the agreement. And it's a foreign entanglement. It is not a free trade thing at all for us. Middle class does not mean you put on a white shirt and tie. Middle class is where people are entrepreneurs. They form their own businesses, they form their own stores, they do their own thing. That is the middle class. It's not employees. I don't care how much money they make. They are not the middle class. The bourgeoisie, as the communists call them. They want to wipe out the middle class, they say, but they really want to wipe out the bourgeoisie. It is the entrepreneurs, it is the free thinkers, if you will, in the economic marketplace that go out and start things. But they're trying to shut all of this down by hook or crook. And one of the things they're going to be using, again, is this transatlantic trade and investment partnership. Talked a little bit about it last week, where Obama has a two-ocean convergence program. They're not free trade. All you libertarians out there, people in the Cato Institute, don't go gaga over this stuff. It is not free trade. It is convergence. It is control. If it was free trade, as I said, you'd put it out on one sheet of 8.5 by 11 piece of paper saying, we agree that we're not going to interfere with your trade, your businessmen and our businessmen. That's the end of it, period. It's gone. We're talking about inches of agreements, at the very beginning of which will say that they are under the Charter of the United Nations. You get some very interesting clues from Foreign Affairs, the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations. For transatlantic trade, this time is different. How different is it? They say that actually what they're going to be doing, and this is a quote, in the broadest terms, a U.S.-European Union trade deal will allow the United States and Europe to maintain their sway over global economic governance. Global economic governance. Not free trade, governance. Both recognize that their ability to set global rules, not free trade, will diminish as economic power shifts to the Asia-Pacific region. In the coming decade, no one power will be able to drive the international agenda. But if they join forces, the United States and Europe, can channel their combined economic weight to keep control of the reins of global economic order. Global economic order. That's not free trade. And then from the European Commission, we have Carol de Gucht, European Commissioner for Trade, saying this, quote, A future deal between the world's two most important economic powers will be a game changer. Together, we will form the largest free trade zone in the world. This deal will set the standard not only for our future bilateral trade and investment, but also for the development of global rules. It's not free trade if it's rules. Free trade is where there are no rules. I get to trade with you and you get to trade with me and government gets to take a nap. That's the way it is. It's not free trade when you're talking governance, rules, regulations, world economic order. Sounds a lot like the New World Order. What we see in the way of the free trade agenda is something that will destroy the Constitution and independence of the American people if you read these agreements. You see, because a lot of people believe that these agreements and treaties and such supersede the Constitution. They do not, but they've convinced enough people to get away with it. You see, if both houses of the Congress of the United States has to vote on a law, and both houses have to vote on an amendment to the Constitution, why is it that only one house, the Senate, needs to vote on treaties if treaties supersede the Constitution and the very system of our government? They don't, but they've convinced people that they do. The logic of it is, unless both houses vote, it can't have any effect on our Constitution and our basic laws and system of government. So that's very interesting in light of the fact that they require both houses to vote on these agreements and what they're calling now partnerships within the free trade agenda. Because the Constitution mandates that Congress, that's both houses, Congress regulate commerce. And so these treaties, these agreements, these partnerships need to be voted on by both houses if they are going to abrogate their responsibility to this new international body. And in the case of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, they are trying to merge us with the European Union. They're trying to leapfrog the program of Robert Pastor of uniting North America into actually uniting at the Atlantic nations, at least the North Atlantic nations. You know, you cannot support this and at the same time say you support the Constitution of the United States, because one negates the other. These free trade agreements negate portions, if not all, of the Constitution of the United States. I've already iterated on one, and that is it negates the mandate of the Constitution for the Congress, both houses, to regulate commerce. If we go into these treaties, that gives the prerogative to this new international body to regulate commerce, all of commerce, including our commerce. So this is a problem with it. Now then, keeping this in mind, how can an organization or an individual, a politician, whatever, say I endorse the free trade policies and at the same time endorse the Constitution of the United States? It doesn't compute. They can't work together. They're incompatible because the free trade agenda negates the Constitution of the United States. So why do organizations such as the American Legislative Exchange Council, nicknamed ALEC, say that they support both at the same time? Because on one hand they say we support the free trade agenda, we want the TTP and the TTIP, the initials of these various partnerships under negotiation, and at the same time we want to improve the Constitution of the United States by going into a conference of the states, a constitutional convention, Article 5 amendment process, whatever you want to call it. They don't compute. They can't compute. They don't work together. The free trade program will negate the constitutional program because we will have lost the Constitution to an international body. So you can't say you stand for free trade and improving the government constitutionally in the United States because we will have lost our independence. We won't have any say-so over it. Now, the media is not a friend of the Constitution. The media and the people in power, the powers that be, are not a friend of our system of government. So why are they quiet? They're quiet because the left is waiting to jump into this thing. The left has been promoting a constitutional convention for years. And now the right, so-called, is giving it to them. In order to understand the dangers of foreign entanglements, and that's what this is all about, whether they're agreements or treaties or pacts or partnerships or anything else, you need to read this book. It's International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. Now, with blatant commercialism, I wrote it. But I really think that this is a good job of explaining what foreign entanglements mean to the American people, our independence, and our Constitution. It's been edited by 3 or 4 other people, so they improved vastly on what I wrote. At any rate, I think you'll find it an easy read, a very quotable read. You will find yourself quoting from it extensively, just out of the top of your head once you've read it. I urge that all of you send for it here at the John Birch Society. Costs $9.95 and quantity prices less. But you really do need to read this book to get a thorough understanding of the depth and breadth of foreign entanglements and what it's doing to the American people, our economy, and our government, and our Constitution. Some of the things that have been happening lately that have been in the news have ramifications for future treaties with other countries, such as the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Now, they don't call it a treaty, but in fact it will be a treaty in implementation. They're just having both houses vote on it in Congress because both houses have to regulate international commerce. But they slip a lot of other things into the mix besides trade. In fact, 80% of the structure of these agreements, these partnerships, have nothing to do with what you and I would consider free trade. When you use the term partnership, it does mean something. And a shorter word for partnership is merger. That's what happens when you form partnerships. And so this is what's going on in not only the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, but the Trans-Pacific Partnership as well. At least that's a embryo NAFTA for the Pacific, if you will. But in regard to the TTIP in the Atlantic, with the European Union, there's something very sinister that's starting to show itself in some of the things that the European Union is doing. Because if we get involved with the European Union, we will be involved in, again, a partnership merging a number of different things besides the economic aspects of our country. The economic aspects are the first layer. And that was what they used to put the EU together with in the first place. It was hidden behind the idea of free trade and economic merger. But now there are a lot of things that the countries can no longer do because of the policies of the European Union. Another thing that has come into the European Parliament and passed this past week is that they are going to ratify the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty. Now, we have not done that yet. Obama supports it, loves it, had Secretary of State Kerry sign it, but it has not yet come before the Senate of the United States because they know they don't quite have the votes for it. Regardless of the argument for this treaty, it is a fact that it will regulate private small arms ownership by a private individual. Complete violation of the Second Amendment of our Bill of Rights. And this is the danger that we see in formulating these partnerships with larger entities like the EU that will affect our Bill of Rights. There are other aspects to this that I'd like to draw into this discussion, because this is not just limited to this one little sliver of where they are trying to do away with the Bill of Rights in our Constitution through international agreements, through international processes, even education. One of the things, just for your own information, if you study what is called Common Core, the new curriculum of the schools around the nation that they're trying to establish, you will find that some of the textbooks that are approved by Common Core do not teach the Bill of Rights as the Bill of Rights is actually written. It is changed, it's altered, and it creates a whole different idea within the student's mind of what the Bill of Rights actually says. For instance, the Second Amendment particularly. In fact, I saw one that is a Common Core approved history book wherein they teach the Second Amendment as being the right of the citizen to bear arms in a militia. That's not what it says. But that's the mindset that people leave with when they leave school. That, yeah, you can own a private firearm if you're part of a militia. Well, we don't have militias anymore, so what's the sense? These treaties are very, very dangerous, and they extend across the whole sphere of economic and social life. And to get a better idea of what's going on with these free trade agreements, I urge that you send for this book that I wrote called International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. Now that sounds awful dry, doesn't it? And if I say so myself, it's not dry. It's an easy read. It's a fun read from the standpoint of what you'll learn. It's not fun from the very things that you're going to be learning, but it is a quotable read. You'll be able to discuss the issue very well after reading this book just one time. International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. Please send for your copy today. And then I'm sure that you'll want to get additional copies for your friends, family, and any opinion molders in your community. It seems that the financial minister of Germany is now talking about a single financial minister for the European zone, the European Union, and it will have its own budget and its own centralized apparatus, not just the central bank, but actually tying all of the state budgets into a European budget, if you will. Interestingly enough, let me just read you a little portion of this. This financial minister of Germany is saying, a long-term advocate of treaty change sees reform establishing an institutional architecture for a common fiscal and economic policy throughout the EU, with a parliament, financial minister, and budget to support countries in crisis and encourage reform. He said it was nonsense to suggest that the power for a Eurozone commissioner to reject national budgets would impinge on sovereignty. Now, let me read that again. He said it was nonsense to suggest the power for a Eurozone commissioner to reject national budgets would impinge on sovereignty. He obviously doesn't understand the word like we understand the word sovereignty. Then he goes on to say, we have moved sovereignty to the European level, he says. It's the same as saying in the United States, we're not going to allow the state legislatures to have a budget unless it's approved by the federal government. Now, these are the individuals that are negotiators for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership want us to get in bed with. For instance, the U.S. official here who is negotiating for us is Michael Froman, and this is from Politico. And he says that the trade deal should be as strong as NATO, this TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. He says, we want the TTIP to build an economic and trade relationship that it is as strong as the strongest military alliance in the world, but fundamentally it has to be driven by the underlying economics. Now, keep in mind what the Germans want. They want a yay or nay out of the federal government, so to speak, of the European Union over their budgets over every one of the countries, not just the individual counties or states within these countries, but the whole country itself, like all of Germany, all of France, etc. Now, if we get in bed with these people, will that also mean through one of these strongest treaties that we've ever put together, we would also have to submit our budget to the EU? I wonder. Not the first step, not probably in the second step, but the third or fourth or fifth, and we would be subject to what the European Union says our budget should be. Now, I suppose when our budget's so out of whack, what difference would it make? Except they would bleed us dry. That's literally what they would do. And which makes my book so very important, International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. We are seeing more and more the language creeping into trade, showing that it is not trade. You see, you think of trade as being you import and we export and so on and so forth. In other words, we make a product and trade you for another product or money and whatever, however it works out. But trade, as the way it is going on today, is not an exchange. It is not a barter. It is an integration of industry and the economies. Get that point across. Never forget it. It is an integration of our industry and our economy with other nations, particularly on an international scale. This is what they are building, and they don't want anything to destroy that. They are building an international financial system and industrial system as far as that goes. The ExxonMobil Corporation, a Texas-based company, won't take sides in the Russia-Ukraine conflict or any other geopolitical disputes. Let me read that again. Won't take sides in the Russia-Ukraine conflict or any other geopolitical disputes. Do you really believe that? Do you believe these mega corporations aren't taking sides? They're taking sides when they don't even want the United States to have any sanctions against these people. It's a real problem. For instance, they are promoting the international trade agreements that are called partnerships that are in negotiation right now. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP. And they say something very revealing in here, in this particular thing. Now, this is the National Foreign Trade Council. in their official statement on their 2014 priorities. Now listen to this statement. As always, this is a quote, as always, we will defend global integration. Global integration. This is not trade, ladies and gentlemen. They say they support the trade treaties, but these treaties are not trade. They're global integration. Words are important. Partnerships, when they've got that in the title of these particular agreements that they're trying to push through, means something. Partnership is integration. Partnership is merger. And that's what's happening. If we are all ruled by one international entity, what does it matter whether we have war or not war if we're all slaves to that international entity? Keep in mind Lord Acton's adage that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The larger the organization, particularly government, the more corrupt it becomes until it becomes draconian, not simply corrupt, and it becomes dictatorial. And that's what's happening with these treaties. They're setting these things up. And I go down in my book, International Merger by Foreign Entanglements, to list these treaties that are already changing American society. Not just our economy, but society as well. You need to get this book and see what they are. And also, I list the 8 steps that are necessary for equitable free trade. Not just free trade, but equitable free trade. So that we do really have barter, we really do have trade, and not merger. I urge all of you to order this. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, served as the foundation for what was nicknamed the North American Union. In other words, out of NAFTA came the next step, which was the Security and Prosperity Partnership, nicknamed the North American Union. Now we are starting to see the same sort of thing in regard to other agreements under negotiation, that they will serve the same platform, only larger than the North American Union, into unions with Asia and unions with Europe, and equally as dangerous as the North American Union. Henry Kissinger, in the Los Angeles Times of July 18, 1993, said this: "It, meaning NAFTA, will represent the most creative step toward a new world order." Those are his words. Another quote: "It is not a conventional trade agreement, but the architecture of a new international system." Unquote. It is not a conventional trade agreement. And again, out of NAFTA, we tried to tell people before NAFTA was passed of what it would do to the United States. But people listened to Kissinger instead of us and Ross Perot and others, saying that there would be a giant sucking sound of jobs and industry out of the United States. That was one of the problems with NAFTA. The other problem was we knew it would be the foundation for even the next step, the North American Union. And out of it, again, they called it the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Partnership. Now, it's interesting that these new treaties that they're negotiating, the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership and the Transatlantic Investment and Trade Partnership, same vernacular, same thing. They are partnerships. In a word, a partnership is merger. That's really what it means. Now, again, they tell us what they have in store. Out of the Council on Foreign Relations magazine, Foreign Affairs, a few years ago, back in 2010, it said this: "Bigger is better." That's the title of this paper promoting the TTIP. Bigger is better. In government, ladies and gentlemen, bigger is never better. Bigger tends to become corrupt. And corruption, once the government becomes total, it becomes completely corrupt. But government will always become corrupt the bigger it is. But here they're lauding the whole principle of it being bigger. And it's better, and it's not. It's totally the opposite. Interestingly enough, in one of the subsections in this article, this is the title of the subsection: resistance is futile. Say what? Resistance is futile. In other words, this thing's going through, don't even bother trying to resist what's happening. You're going to lose your country, get used to it.